Chapter 661. The autumn wind was chilly, and the green ant wine was in high demand. The willows at the intersection of the two relay roads outside the city were particularly thick and strong. Under the shade of the willows was a clean wine shop. The wine seller was an old man in his 50s. As business was getting better, he let his son and grandson, who were busy farming, come here to help with the business. Originally, it was more suitable for the daughter-in-law to do the odd jobs. After all, only a woman could put her face down and bargain with the customers. The old man was a simple man. After doing business for more than 10 years, he was still shy and could not open his mouth. However, a few years ago, his daughter-in-law had caused a disaster by offending a group of drunken and troublemakers. The old man did not dare to let her suffer. Even now, he still had lingering fears. At that time, if it were not for someone passing by the wine shop who could not stand the sight of those dandy young men in bright armor, he would not only have to pay to avert the disaster, but also his daughter-in-law's chastity. Even now, when he thought about it, the old man still felt guilty and uneasy. He felt that he was useless. Later on, when he heard that those young men who relied on their connections to join the army were probably the personal guards of the Crown Prince of Baelyong, the old man accepted his fate. However, it was a pity that the great general was like a tiger father and a dog son. When he was drunk in private, he would curse a few words about the ways of the world. He thought that when the great general passed away one day, he must not let the crown prince be the king of Baelyong. Everyone said that General Chinjibao was invincible on the battlefield, but he was kind to the soldiers and the people. The old man and some of the old farmers in the neighborhood who were about the same age also thought that General Chun was good at fighting and would not be bad if he became the king of Baelyong in the future. Today, the old man was in a good mood and took out the homemade green ant wine that he could not bear to drink. Green ant wine was not expensive to begin with. High officials and dignitaries could afford to drink it, and the common people also did not lack the money to buy it. Only black market merchants who were blinded by greed would drink it. However, there were also good and bad green ant wine. Generally, it was sold in bulk by the caddy and by the bowl. Although the old man was kind, he was not willing to lose money and take out the mellow aged wine. The main reason was that the old rich man who was sitting there drinking wine was his benefactor. That year, if it was not for this old man who stopped that group of lawless soldiers, his daughter-in-law would have been dragged to the barracks by those bastards. Today's jar of green ant is free of charge. In the old man's opinion, elder brother Sue, who was drinking, couldn't be a rich gentleman. He was dark and skinny. He probably worked hard to earn money. However, he was dressed well. At least his clothes looked like silk and satin. It was comfortable to look at. After dealing with a table full of customers, the old man finally had some free time. He draped a wet towel over his shoulder and sat at the table next to him. He smiled and said, "Brother Sue, why don't you call nephew Yuan over for a drink? I haven't seen you guys for 2 years. What's wrong? Are you afraid that I'll go bankrupt from drinking?" A tall man with a dignified appearance stood at the edge of the shade. The old man remembered clearly that he was the one who had taught those little bastards a lesson. Later, he learned that he was old brother Sue's adopted son, surnamed Yuan. The old man had been selling wine here for many years. He had seen many children of rich families come and go, but none of them could compare to this young master Yuan. Old brother Sue had such a good character and appearance as his adopted son. Good people are rewarded. However, today was different from the few times they had met before. Old brother Sue had brought a pair of people with him. One was a young scholar, and the other was a well-behaved little girl. It was strange that young Master Yuan wasn't sitting at the table to drink. Could it be that the scholar was old brother Sue's biological son and granddaughter? They didn't look alike. However, the old man wasn't a gossipy woman. He didn't mention this. The rich man waved his hand and smiled. He doesn't like to drink and is arrogant. Even if I personally persuade him to drink, he will say that excessive drinking will make things worse. His reasoning is always better than mine. I can't win against him. Brother Huang, let's just let him be. Old Huang smiled and nodded. It's fine, it's fine. Not drinking is better than drinking. Unlike young Master Yuan, my son isn't cut out for great things. He always sneakily drinks a few mouthfuls when I'm not paying attention. I'm too lazy to scold him. We're already so old. We've thought things through. The old man with the surname Su drank a mouthful of green ant wine. He took a deep breath and snorted. With a face full of joy, he said, "Brother, your words are very straightforward." The old man was happy. He laughed and said, "What do you mean by straightforward? It's all nonsense. We don't know any reasoning. We're just living our lives. My grandson went to a private school to learn how to read. I'm just waiting for him to change the word wine on the brochure. It doesn't matter if it looks good or not. It's fine as long as he can recognize it." The old man thought for a moment and said, "My son's handwriting is quite good. Why don't we use it first and change it when your grandson learns how to write couplets?" Old Huang was stunned. He rubbed his hands and said with an embarrassed expression, "That's good. But won't it be too troublesome for you?" The old man waved his hand and smiled comfortably. "It's fine. I'm here today to wait for my son to come home. When he finishes drinking, won't it be easy? It's just that I don't have a pen and ink." Old Huang slapped his thigh and said, "If you don't have it, then go get it. The village isn't far. It's 2 miles away. I'll get my grandson to go get it. That brat's legs are very nimble." There was a child who had been in the private school for less than 2 years who had been happily squatting nearby. He rested his chin on his hand and peeked at the little girl sitting at the table. He felt that she was really beautiful. When he heard his grandfather praising his legs in front of everyone, he felt very proud and smiled. Without his grandfather's instructions, he stood up and disappeared. Old Huang generously took the bowl of wine that Brother Su handed over. He took a sip and asked with a smile, "Brother, is your son a scholar who wants to take the imperial examinations?" The old man shook his head and said, "He's not very educated. However, I've been forcing him to go out for the past few years. He travels very far and doesn't stay at home for many days. Sometimes I regret it." The old man sighed and said, "Brother Su, young people should go out and experience more. Otherwise, they won't be able to support a family. Brother, your family business is definitely not small. Unlike us, who only have 1 mu of land our whole lives, young Master Su will definitely have to suffer more. It's a good thing." The scholar who didn't drink much smiled and raised his head to look at the end of the post-house road. Old Huang only drank half a bowl of wine before he went to greet the other tables of customers. The tavern was a small business with a small profit margin. It was rare to have a repeat customer, so all of them were unfamiliar faces. The table of scholars didn't have loud voices, but it sounded like they were talking about the world. Old Huang couldn't understand them anyway. The table of people who had been in the Jianghu were mostly dressed in simple clothes. Among them, there was one who was dressed in brocade clothes and had a loud voice. He spoke with a foreign accent, but he was relatively generous. Other than 2 jars of green ant wine, he also ordered a few caddies of cooked beef. The tables of people didn't interfere with each other's business. The scholar talked loudly and arrogantly. Chapter 662. On the other hand, the group of Jianghu people took a few more glances at young Master Yuan, who was standing like a spear by the side of the post-house. There was some fear in their eyes. They knew their own weight. They had come to Bailiang to make a living. They wanted to open an escort agency near Liangzhou or join a slightly larger gang. They had traveled a long way. They had left their hometown in Liaodong because they had been bitten black and blue by a mad dog who also had the surname Yuan. Their original gang had been strangled by that brat, so they definitely had some tricks up their sleeves. They were definitely not those so-called invincible fighters who fought all the way from the village head to the village head, from the east to the village head, and from the east to the village head. They were also not boxing masters who dared to call themselves grandmasters. The reason they had chosen Bailiang as a place to stay was because they knew that the king of Bailiang had brought prosperity to Liaodong. Although Bailiang had suppressed Jianghu quite a bit, at least there was some incense burning there. Furthermore, there were just a few small fish and a few small shrimps. They had not done anything against the country's laws, so it should not be difficult for them to make a living. However, since they were unfamiliar with the place, they had to be careful. They were more cautious, afraid that they would encounter an unreasonable territorial snake. They had heard about young Master Yuan from the conversation between the old man in the wine shop and the rich man. The reason they spoke loudly and deliberately talked about the heroic deeds of wandering Jianghu was because they wanted to see if they could gain the favor of the crippled rich man. It would be best if they could get a guard instructor who could guarantee a steady income. Otherwise, they were embarrassingly short of money and did not have much traveling expenses. They would not put on a facade and ask for a few more caddies of beef. A single copper coin could not kill a hero. How could they dare to rob in the territory under that butcher's jurisdiction? A scholar put down his wine bowl and clicked his tongue. The Longxiang army penetrated deep into the enemy's territory alone and showed the might of the Baoyang army. The Great Snow Dragon cavalry even killed all the way to the northern barbarians' Nanjing prefecture. This is all true, but what does His Royal Highness have to do with this? I've heard that the Crown Prince is very confident. So it turns out that you've been strategizing in a brothel in Liangzhou from thousands of miles away. Impressive, impressive. Another scholar from the same school who had studied the books of the sages shook his head and laughed. It's the same thing. They're both fighting on horseback. His Royal Highness is fighting on horseback when he's on a girl in a brothel. Isn't he fighting on horseback? Yuan Liang, you are underestimating our hereditary His Royal Highness. A scholar with a jade pendant hanging on his waist sneered, I'm waiting for this prince to ride the Empress of Beimang. That's true ability. When the time comes, I'll be the first to tame him. The scholar who started this said in a strange tone, Is the age difference a little too big? Scholar Xuanyu asked, Isn't His Royal Highness famous for being unrestrained? The table of scholars who were worried about the country and the people burst into laughter. Young Master Yuan, who was standing quietly in the distance, narrowed his eyes. Instantly, a strong, murderous aura exploded from his body. Among the three old and young people at the next table, the little girl who knew how to be grateful looked indignant. There were tears in her eyes. The old tycoon drank a mouthful of wine and smiled. Chun Shiliang, the scholar from Jiangnan, also smiled gently. The scholar at the other table, who was wearing the most luxurious clothing, put down his wine bowl heavily. He didn't point at anyone and laughed. I've heard that the Crown Prince of Baoyang went to marshal Emperor City and even went to the top of the city wall. Later on, he followed the old god of swords and killed his way to the king of Guangling by the Guangling River. I admit that I can't do it even if I have 100 guts. If it were someone else, let alone doing it, they would be so scared that they peed in their pants. Don't talk to me about having an expert protecting you. At this level of grudge, it doesn't matter if you're the crown prince or not. I don't believe that a crown prince who only knows how to bully women can make a sword immortal like Li Chungang escort him for thousands of miles. Can he make the second in the world, marshal Emperor City, let him go to the top of the city wall and walk out of the city? His friend tugged at his sleeve and shook his head slightly, indicating to his brother not to let his emotions affect his decisions. Scholar Pendant Jade had a calm expression and said slowly, Is a boorish man worthy to talk about the world affairs? A toad opens its mouth to the sky and swallows the sun and the moon? You sure talk big. When arguing with someone, how could the people of Jianghu win against a scholar? That person of Jianghu in embroidered clothes was probably an impatient boorish man. When he heard such sarcastic remarks, he grabbed a knife on the table and immediately held down the people at the same table. Qin Shiliang finally opened his mouth and smiled. A toad swallowing the sky and the moon is called ambition. Even if it's unpleasant to hear, it's just having high standards. But a frog at the bottom of the well looking at the sky is petty. A scholar shot a glance at this shabby scholar in white clothes and sneered, Who do you think you are? Chun Shiliang said calmly, Let's not talk about me first. Even if you read a few sage books, you're not even a thing. If I were your father, I wouldn't have ridden your mother. What's the use of giving birth to you? The little girl covered her mouth and laughed. She secretly gave Brother Chun a thumbs up. Chun Shiliang touched the little girl's head and ignored the scholars who were so angry that their chests almost exploded. The rich man glanced at the people of Jianghu and greeted old Huang with a smile. Come, give these warriors 2 jars of green ant wine and 5 caddies of beef. Put on my tab. All right, Brother Huang, this money can't be less. The people at the table were not pretentious and cupped their fists to thank him. Dust flew on the road to the inn. The old man stood up and put his hands into his sleeves. He gently looked at his son, who went all the way to the north and cut off Su Huainan's head and the fifth raccoon's head. Su Fingyin turned over and got off the horse. White Bear Yuan's Wuzong smiled and walked forward to take the reins of the horse. Su Fingyin smiled and thanked him. He said, "I'll drink a bowl of wine with second brother Yuan later." Yuan's Wuzong nodded. The old man rubbed the head of his second son, Huang Man, and then walked to the table with his eldest son. He said softly, "You've become darker." Su Fingyin nodded. After the father and son sat down, the little girl sensibly moved to Chun Shiliang's bench. She greeted the brother who had once picked up the wishing money for her and gave her a big watermelon. She shyly called young Master Su. The latter reached out and pinched her nose. He smiled and said, "Now you're much fairer than me. In the future, there will be a lot of handsome young masters lining up to admire you." At the table, the old man sat alone on a bench. Chun Shiliang and the little girl sat on another. Su Fingyin and Su Longxiang sat together. Su Beiji sat on the last bench. Yuan's Wuzong stood and drank a bowl of wine. He stood back to his original position. Su Xiao asked with a smile, "All right, I boasted to the tavern's owner, Brother Huang, that your handwriting is not bad. I want you to write the word wine so that I can hang it on a pole to attract customers. Is that okay?" Su Fingyin drank a bowl of wine and wiped the corner of his mouth. "It's okay." The little boy hurriedly brought a brush, ink, and a small piece of satin that was carefully stored at home. Su Fingyin raised his arm and wrote, but he wrote very slowly and neatly. Old Huang was naturally satisfied and thanked him repeatedly. When Su Fingyin returned the brush and ink, he stood up and said with a smile, "No need, no need." He even joked that his father must have come here many times to cheat wine. It was just a small matter. After a moment of silence, Su Xiao wanted to say something but stopped. Su Fingyin lowered his head and drank. His lips touched the edge of the bowl. He slightly raised his head and said, "I already know." Su Xiao nodded. Su Fingyin asked softly, "Are the troops ready?" Su Xiao smiled. Su Fingyin tightly pursed his lips. "I want to enter the city first. I'll go later." Su Xiao sighed in his heart. Su Fingyin drank another bowl of wine and gently stood up. Su Xiao raised his arm to Yuan's Wuzong. Su Beiji bowed deeply to the old man before sitting down. While sitting down and drinking, he and Chun Shiliang looked at each other almost at the same time. They looked at each other, but quickly moved away. Su Fingyin mounted the horse and galloped to the northwest. There were 800 white horses of the Phoenix Battalion ahead. They were going to kill Prince Zhao Kai. Su Xiao sat down and drank. Old Huang came closer and joked, "Young Master Su is really handsome. You don't look like old brother Su at all." Su Xiao asked old Huang to sit down and laughed. "It's good that he doesn't look like me. If he looks like me, it will be difficult to find a wife. He looks like his mother. What a blessing." The old wine seller had a deep expression on his face. Su Xiao stood up to pay the bill. After much persuasion, he finally handed it to the old man. Before he left, he said, "Those people who caused trouble here back then were not from the Foam Battalion. I have to tell you about this, brother." Old Huang smiled. "It doesn't matter. We can't afford to offend anyone. We just want to be safe." Su Xiao said softly, "I don't know if I'll have a chance to drink here again." Old Huang said anxiously, "You're treating me like an outsider. Brother, you have a few jars of green ant wine." Su Xiao patted Old Huang's shoulder and left the wine shop. Old Huang stood at the edge of the wine shop and suddenly realized something. He turned to his son and shouted, "That word, replace the old one and hang the new one." Chapter 663. Everyone in Bailiang knew that there was a group of elite light cavalry outside the capital city. Most of them were sons of rich families, and some of them were descendants of generals. Their father's generation didn't have a high position, and their numbers were always maintained at around 800. Due to the lack of a leader and the restriction of rules, this cavalry rarely showed themselves. Only last year did they choose 5 people from each of the 20 bids to make a total of 100 cavalry. Then, They carried back the bodies of more than a dozen of their comrades who died in battle and brought back many boxes of martial arts manuals from a place called Mount Huey's Bull Gang. The outside world didn't pay much attention to them. His Highness had done a lot of ridiculous things over the years, wasn't it? What could a mere 800 cavalry do? Wang Cheng had once asked Lieutenant Yuan Meng this question in private. Yuan Meng told him that when Chu Lushan's General Chu led his troops to Shu, he only had 2,000 to 3,000 men. Even so, he was still able to crush western Shu, which was surrounded by natural barriers. Cavalry Wang Cheng's good brother, Lin Heng, died in the Battle of Xiangfan City's Reed Marsh. He was pierced through by Wang Mingyin's halberd. When they were crossing the gates of hell, they were on duty together. Lin Heng saw that person sitting at the bow of the ship and flicking his saber with his fingers. Lin Heng even said that the person wasn't just for show. Although Wang Cheng's martial arts weren't as good as Lin Heng, who always said that his saber skills would be better than Gu Jiantong's, he didn't believe it at the time. Later, outside Xiangfan City, he was killed by Wang Mingyin, one of the few experts in the martial arts world. After seeing that person draw his saber, Wang Cheng finally believed it. However, Lin Heng died. But Wang Cheng didn't hate that person, because that day, when they faced off against King of Jing An's 1,000 cavalry, that person took the lead and lightly stabbed a fierce general of the Qingzhou army to death. After that person gave the order to withdraw his saber, he didn't say anything to calm the soldiers down. He just personally bandaged Wang Cheng's wound. Wang Cheng wasn't a rash person. The reason why he entered the Phoenix Battalion was because his father, who had been a lieutenant in Chengdu, said that there would be a day when he could earn merits with a clear conscience. Wang Cheng naturally didn't feel that he was going to throw his life away. Is my life not a life? Why should he work for you? My father isn't that bad either. After he came down from the Bailiang army, he was at least the head of a county's army. But after that trip to the pugilistic world, not to mention Wang Cheng, even a ruffian like Wang Donglin had changed after returning to Bailiang. If anyone in the Phoenix Battalion said anything bad about that person, Wang Donglin didn't waste his breath. He went to the training ground and had a horse battle. He won 3 battles in a row. In the 4th battle, he used a wooden spear to poke someone off his horse. He made that person sit high on the horse and pointed the tip of the spear at his chest. Before Wang Donglin could open his mouth, the other lieutenant, Hong Shuwen, who had traveled the pugilistic world with him, flipped over and got on his horse. He then poked that person off his horse and asked him if he was convinced. Hong Shuwen was one of the most ruthless people in the Phoenix Battalion. He was outstanding in both horse and infantry battles. Even Field Officer Yuan said that this kid was a dog that didn't bark. When he bit someone, he didn't know how to hold back. Very quickly, no one in the Phoenix Battalion dared to speak ill of this young man who had never stepped into the military camp. It wasn't that they didn't want to say anything, but they didn't dare to. Damn it. Hong Shuwen had fought with a few people in private. Field Officer Yuan always said that he would punish him, but after the fight, he didn't say anything. There were even people who saw Field Officer Yuan giving special treatment to Hong Shuwen, teaching him a few spear techniques. Everyone finally understood that Field Officer Yuan had also switched sides with that fellow. Moreover, after that incident, the famous Great Halberd Ningame of the Bailiang army would occasionally visit the Phoenix Battalion's encampment to look for Wang Cheng and Wang Donglin's cavalry. During this time, he even took in 2 anonymous disciples. Although they didn't officially acknowledge each other as disciples, it was close enough. He taught them how to throw the short halberd. When he was free, he even took out money to treat these nameless soldiers who didn't have any military achievements to drink. This made others very envious. After all, Ningame wasn't an ordinary character. He was one of the 4 fangs of Bailiang. He was on the same level as Jian Xiongzhu, a first-rate general who commanded 6,000 Iron Stupa cavalry. Although the hearts of the 800 people in the Phoenix Battalion were currently scattered, everyone was worthy of the Bailiang saber at their waist. In terms of individual strength, they definitely wouldn't lose to any of the elite troops in Bailiang, especially for a bastard like Hong Shuwen who fought as if he was eating. He should have become an elite crossbowman long ago. The 800 light cavalry held their breaths and waited quietly for the arrival of that person. They only knew that they were about to embark on a long-distance raid. They didn't know who to kill. They didn't know how many soldiers the enemy had. They didn't know if they would survive after the battle. Su Xiao sat in the carriage. The coachman was Spear Immortal Wang Xiu's junior brother, Han Laozhan. Chun Shiliang and the little girl followed him into the carriage. Su Beiji was left behind to enter Liangzhou's prefectural city and follow the coachman to the king's residence. He rode on horseback, accompanied by several old retainers whose auras were as long as rivers. The carriage suddenly stopped. Su Beiji suddenly saw the king of Bailiang lift the curtain and wave at him. Su Beiji sat in the carriage. He wasn't trembling with fear, but he still felt all sorts of emotions. The hunchbacked old man in front of him and Huang Sanjia had destroyed the principles of the spring and autumn annals. They were even said to have broken the backs of millions of Confucian scholars. Su Beiji really couldn't imagine that the butcher was an old man who talked and laughed with peddlers. Su Xiao leaned against the wall of the carriage with his hands in his sleeves. He said to the grandson of his old friend, "Don't hold a grudge about Su Huainan's death. Of course, if you really want to hold a grudge, you should hold a grudge against me." Su Beiji knelt on the ground and lowered his head. Su Beiji doesn't dare. Su Xiao smiled. "You don't dare?" Chapter 664. Su Beiji's back was immediately drenched in sweat, but his tone didn't change. He kept his gaze down and said slowly, "Since Su Beiji came to Bailiang, he will work for Bailiang wholeheartedly. But if you want me to have no grudges, Su Beiji is not a saint, so it's impossible." Su Xiao nodded and said, "That's true. Very good." Su Beiji was silent. Su Xiao said softly, "Let's sit down and talk. Speaking of which, we are still distant relatives. You can call me Uncle Su in the future." Su Beiji sat down cross-legged. Su Xiao asked. This time, Prince Zhao Kai went to the western regions. As expected, the 800 Phoenix Barrets will meet him at the throat between Jianghe and Lusha River. Besides a powerful Dharma king of the esoteric sect, Zhao Kai also has 200 elite Yulin cavalry and 16 Imperial Golden Saber Guards. As for the secret forces, Bailiang spies didn't find out much. Do you think this assassination is worth it? Even if it succeeds, what are the pros and cons? Su Beiji asked calmly. May I ask how many soldiers in Jianghe have rebelled? Su Xiao frowned and said softly, "Rebelling?" The old man smiled and said, "Let's do as you say. Jianghe has been a top strategic town since ancient times. Its importance can be ranked in the top 10 in the entire Liang dynasty. It has a total of 16,000 soldiers, half of which are infantry and half of which are cavalry. The 8,000 infantry are mostly former subordinates of Gu Jiantang, but there are also some subordinates of King Yin. As for the cavalry, there are 3,000 of them. They are just west of Jianghe, killing a group of bandits." Su Beiji continued to ask, "How many of the remaining 5,000 can come out in an emergency?" Su Xiao said, "More than half, still 3,000 soldiers. However, the prerequisite was that they had Gu Jiantang's Tiger Seal, which was the Minister of War's Tiger Seal. Unfortunately, I have some old subordinates on the way to the Sword Pavilion. They're old, and they might not be able to deliver military intelligence quickly." Su Beiji shook his head and said, "I dare say that it is not these 3,000 soldiers who will make a move, but the other 2,000. Because even if Gu Jiantang is willing to issue this order, there will be a woman in the imperial palace in the capital who will stop it." Su Xiao frowned. "Oh, who would have the courage to do that?" Su Beiji said indifferently, "The son of the Zhao family, to be more precise, is Han Jiaoxi, who wholeheartedly wants to help Zhao Kai become the emperor. It was very likely that this eunuch, who seemed to be losing his power in the inner palace, would personally come to the capital. Moreover, Han Jiaoxi's actions would mean that he is truly going downhill from the imperial palace. After all, it is a taboo for the imperial family for a eunuch to participate in the struggle for the throne. Moreover, the current emperor is not a muddle-headed emperor. No matter how great the friendship he has with a personal eunuch before he sits on the throne, he can't afford to squander it like this. Even if the son of the Zhao family really wants to let Zhao Kai succeed the throne, Han Jiaoxi will have to give up his position. Su Xiao nodded. That makes sense. Chun Liangxi, who had been holding the little girl, looked down at her and smiled knowingly. She didn't know why Brother Chun was smiling, but she smiled at him out of habit. Su Beiji sighed from the bottom of his heart. Even if the heir is determined to kill off Zhao Kai and the 200 Imperial Guards, I'm afraid it will be a battle of backups, like the mantis stalking the cicada. Su Xiao suddenly laughed loudly and pointed at Qin Shiliang. Then he said to Su Beiji, "You two, great minds think alike, but there are still some small differences." Su Beiji didn't look at Qin Shiliang. Qin Shiliang also didn't raise his head to look at Su Beiji. One was the grandson of the king of the northern courtyard, Su Huainan, who had high hopes for him. The other was a poor scholar who didn't even have the qualifications to be seated at the Baowu Temple's winding water-flowing goblet. Just like a woman from a wealthy family, even if she has the appearance of an ordinary person, she has the bearing of a great family. She needs to be carefully sculpted and removed from her arrogance. Only then can she slowly see her heavenly fragrance and national beauty and gradually enter the best state. Just like a beauty from a poor family, although extremely beautiful and moving, in the end, she lacks the natural bearing of wealth. She needs to be given an aura from the big picture and open up the layout. Only then could she be as round as she wishes, charming but not demonic. On the top floor of the tide-listening pavilion was a writing table. There was a piece of fine paper on which a scholar had written a few comments from Su Beiji and Qin Shiliang before his death. Su Xiao said softly, "You two are much luckier to meet Fingyan than those scholars who met me." Su Xiao laughed softly. "In the future, I'll have to trouble you two in Bailiang. It's already difficult to establish a business and preserve one's achievements. If you really want to rely on those who preserve their achievements to fight for a new country, it'll be even more difficult." The two of them were both stunned and frightened. A rare hint of loneliness appeared in Su Xiao's eyes. "After entering the city, you two should first go to Feng Yan's grave to toast someone. He valued the two of you greatly when he was alive. Don't disappoint him. This person is called Li Yishan." A group of cavalrymen arrived with a rumble on a remote path that didn't belong to the post house. Yuan Meng suddenly opened his eyes wide, his gaze instantly burning. This general, who had been mocked by his colleagues all year round, was even trembling as he held his spear. The leader of the cavalrymen was an extremely distinguished young master. However, on his handsome face, which should have been frivolous, there was a solemn and heroic air that even the 800 white horses would find unfamiliar. There was a short knife at his waist on his left hand and a long sword on his right. The second cavalryman was the black-clothed and barefoot butcher's second son, who in Beimang and Liang didn't know about the Longxiang army, who didn't know about the enemy of 10,000, Su Longxiang. The third cavalryman was the white bear Yuan Zuozong, who was known as one of the top 3 in the Liang dynasty's army. This unparalleled valiant general, known throughout the world during the battle at the tomb of a concubine of West Chu, only carried a Bailiang knife, which was enough. The fourth cavalryman was a woman in green with a long spear in her hand. The fifth cavalryman was a woman whose arms were hidden in the big sleeves of a red robe and a red scarf on her head. Her face couldn't be seen clearly, but her demonic aura was eerie. Her aura didn't lose to Yuan Zuozong at all. The 5 cavalrymen passed by the Phoenix Battalion in succession. Yuan Meng was the first to turn his horse around. The rest of the cavalrymen were silent and followed closely behind. Chapter 665. In the cold and cheerless imperial palace, after the autumn rain, the autumn wind brushed the autumn leaves. The newest imperial concubine, Yin Dongwu, sat under a parasol tree and told her mother-in-law some interesting anecdotes from the streets. Nothing was taboo. The relationship between mother-in-law and daughter-in-law was harmonious, far beyond what people outside the palace could imagine. This talented woman of northern Liang, who was only slightly overshadowed by Su Weisheng, smiled as she spoke of the matter of writing a poem on a red leaf. That gentle, courteous, and thrifty scholarly prince immediately picked up a piece of wudong leaf that had just drifted down and didn't have time to sweep it away. He stood up with a serious expression and bowed with his hands clasped in front of his chest. "Wife, please write a poem for me." Empress Zhao Ji, who was sitting to the side, was wearing a phoenix coronet. Although her appearance was average, she was extremely dignified and elegant. She was deeply respected by the emperor. For so many years, they had treated each other with respect. In addition to working diligently, the emperor of the Zhao family would occasionally personally draw her eyebrows when he was in the mood. As for Zhao Ji's method of managing the harem with both strength and gentleness, it really made all the favored concubines' hair stand on end. Not long ago, there was a concubine who was banished to the cold palace. She washed her face with tears every day in the Changchun Palace and secretly spent 300 taels of gold to buy an extremely sentimental poem. In the end, it was the empress who personally delivered it to the emperor. Zhao Ji looked at the small squabbles between the princes and imperial concubines, and the corners of her mouth turned up slightly. She glared at her son, who was seen as the one with the least ancestral spirit among all the princes. She was imposing without being angry, but her tone slightly revealed the secret of heaven. "You're not proper. You are much less talented than your own wife. You also do not know how to improve." The prince, who was famous in the capital for his elegance, said helplessly, "A woman's virtue is to have no talent. Mother, you should teach Dongwu a lesson. She is full of talent. She is more than qualified to be the chancellor of the Imperial College or the Dahuang sect." Yin Dongwu copied Zhao Ji and glared at her husband, who spoke without thinking, and pinched him under the table. Zhao Ji reached out and slapped her son's forehead. "Are you scolding me indirectly? Or are you scolding me and Dong Yuwu together?" When the prince smiled, his handsome face would be filled with a heartwarming warmth. It was very warm and intoxicating. Such an elegant man, born in a royal family, could make the noble ladies in the capital go crazy for him. Back then, he married the Bailiang girl, Yin Dongwu, who happened to be the daughter of a Bailiang civil official. It really made the entire capital feel incredulous. However, reality proved that the two of them were a perfect match. Yin Dongwu had appeared at the palace banquets several times, and no one could find any fault with him. This made many old foxes who had lived in the capital for a long time feel gratified. The prince held Yin Dongwu's cold hands and faced Empress Zhao Ji. He smiled and said, "I have scolded both of you. Both of you are very talented. You are also a good-for-nothing who brought shame to my mother. You are the two women I love the most in the world. I love my mother more when I am with my mother. When I am at home, I love my wife more." Zhao Ji joked, "If Feng heard this, let's see how you deal with it." The prince sighed sadly. "This stupid girl. I have been worried for nothing for 20 years. These years, she has come to find you more often than I have." Zhao Ji said calmly, "When she gets married and suffers some hardship, she will know who really cares for her." The prince shook his head and said, "I can't bear for her to suffer. It hurts so much." Zhao Ji smiled again. "Your wife is still here. You don't need to think before you speak. How can you love your sister for a lifetime? Besides, it is useless to rely on your love." Yin Dongwu said softly, "Princess Suizhu's personality is really good." Zhao Ji nodded. The prince reached out and held a yellow leaf. He sighed, "It is so cold in autumn." Thunder rumbled in the gloomy sky without warning. The prince frowned and said, "It sounds like winter thunder." Zhao Ji, who liked the clean scene in her field of vision, gently brushed away a leaf that had just left the branch on the table. She raised her head and squinted at the west. The prince listened to the thunder and smiled as he quietly threw away the autumn leaf in his hand. After Su Xiao granted him the title of king, Gu Jiantang, who destroyed the spring and autumn kingdoms, took charge of the Ministry of War with the rank of first-rank general. He was one rank higher than the other 5 ministers and became the nominal head of the military in the Liang dynasty. Apart from the 6 vassal kings, in the imperial court, only Grand Secretary Zhang Jiulu and the leader of the remnants, Sun Shiji, were on par with him. Last year, he rushed to the northern border of the empire to personally take charge of all border matters and rarely participated in court meetings. However, no one dared to write a memorial to remove the title of Minister of War because they empathized with great General Gu's hard work. The Ministry of War was still the watertight general's camp of the Gu party. As a first-class important minister of the border, as well as the leader of Gu's party, apart from his previous night duty in the palace, Gu Jiantang almost never had any private contact with Zhang Jiulu. When he returned to the capital this time, he made an unprecedented visit to Grand Secretary Zhang's residence, doing so openly, not caring if the emperor suspected that the civil and military officials were of the same mind, or if the other officials in the capital were in cahoots with each other. This type of official taboo that the powerful ministers of previous dynasties feared like a tiger, on Gu Jiantang's side, it became a trivial matter. The great general came out in casual clothes, even bringing along the newly appointed guerrilla officer Yuan Tingshan, who might be his adopted son or son-in-law. On the same street, there were many pairs of eyes staring fixedly from behind the doors of most of the important ministers' residences. When Minister Gu walked out of the blue-eyed Grand Secretary Zhang's residence in large strides, they quickly reported to their masters who were waiting for news. No more, no less, exactly an hour. It wasn't even enough time to drink 2 pots of tea. What kind of important military and state matters could be discussed? After entering the mansion, Yuan Tingshan, who had been wandering around aimlessly, followed the great general into the carriage. He didn't find any clues from this world's #1 bladesman's face. His expression was as indifferent as a white steamed bun, making Yuan Tingshan, who wished for nothing more than a heavenly thunder and earthly fire fight, feel extremely regretful. Yuan Tingshan had an impatient temperament where he couldn't sit still for even half a moment. The silent carriage made him pass his days and years. As soon as they drove out of a street where every door had a dynasty's great bodhisattva sitting inside, he couldn't help but ask, "Great General, what is going on?" Gu Jiantang didn't pay him any attention. Chapter 666. Yuan Tingshan normally acted like he was #1 under the heavens in front of everyone, but in front of Great General Gu, he was a bit better, not daring to act rashly. After all, deep down, he still sincerely admired this future father-in-law who had both military achievements and martial strength, yet was powerless. Originally, the one he worshipped the most was that king with a different surname, the butcher Su Xiao. Later on, in Gangnam-do, he tried to assassinate the widow Su Xiao, but was seriously injured by that young immortal who could sever fate with a sword. He felt like there was no longer any good karma between him and Su Xiao in this life, so he turned his attention to Gu Jiantang. Yuan Tingshan could only mutter, "If you don't want to say it, then don't say it. I don't feel like guessing." Gu Jiantang calmly said, "You don't need to worry about the northern Jianghu. I will send you to Ji Province." Yuan Tingshan's brows furrowed tightly. Ji Province? The old nest of the valiant Martyrhan family? I heard they were executed for the sake of Grand Secretary Zhang's prestige. Great General, at the time, you also contributed quite a bit, right? Gu Jiantang gave Yuan Tingshan a look out of the corner of his eyes. The latter shrunk his neck, saying quietly, "Either way, there isn't a single official who isn't vicious and merciless. How many people have I killed? Compared to you all, it's nothing." Gu Jiantang's tone didn't fluctuate at all. "When you arrive at Ji Province, you don't need to report to me when you kill people. When you arrive at the imperial court, I will help you stop the impeachment." Yuan Tingshan was pleasantly surprised. "Really?" Gu Jiantang closed his eyes. Yuan Tingshan said with a laugh, "When there is a great battle to fight, you better not let this old one get promoted to a high official, or else when the time comes, Bailiang won't be able to bear the consequences. This old one has a death grudge with that surnamed Su and His Royal Highness." Gu Jiantang closed his eyes, saying with a sneer, "Just based on you?" Yuan Tingshan's hands held the back of his head, leaning against the carriage wall, his expression gloomy. "That day will come. Let's see whose blade can take more lives." Gu Jiantang slowly said, "There might not necessarily be a chance." Yuan Tingshan said in shock, "Great General, what do you mean by these words?" Gu Jiantang put on a fake smile, which made the fearless mad dog Yuan feel a chill run down his spine. "Sit on a mountain and watch the tigers fight." But this time, those sitting on the mountain will all come down the mountain. As the throat of the dynasty that controlled the West, Jiang'a housed a sizable number of war elite troops. They had both infantry and cavalry, and the 8,000 infantry were mostly mountain-top powers from the spring and autumn war. Most of them were the old subordinates of General Gu Jiantang, and the king of Yin was slightly fewer. The 8,000 cavalrymen were in a complicated situation where three parties were vying for supremacy. Among them, 3,000 cavalrymen were orphans without parents. The leader, Wang Ji, was a general who rose to his position after the spring and autumn period. He often led 200 to 300 elite cavalrymen into the hinterlands of the western regions to hunt. His hands were so bloody that they were almost black, and he was not very popular among his peers. Currently, he was leading 3,000 cavalrymen to kill a group of highland bandits. Other than that, although the general in charge of the 3,000 cavalrymen was not a member of the Gu party, he was a relatively orthodox member of the Ministry of War. He relied on his connections in the capital to climb up the ranks. He belonged to the foreign faction of the Sword Garret. The remaining 2,000 cavalrymen were born and raised in Swords Gate. Cavalry General He Yin had always been a fence-sitter, and he had been living a difficult life. He did not have many men under him, and he had such a spineless leader. Although the 2,000 cavalrymen were strong, they could not gain much from him. What was strange was that the various factions of the Sword Garret were intertwined with each other, and these 2,000 cavalrymen were not willing to cross the wall. The Gu party's General Ruan Daicheng was the nominal commander of the Sword Garret. Today, he watched as the 2,000 cavalrymen left the Sword Garret without permission. He had already cursed the 18 generations of He Yan's ancestors in the barracks. He was about to ask his trusted aide to write an impeachment report to the Ministry of War, accusing He Yan of leaving the Sword Garret for no reason. But when Ruan Daicheng was about to finish the report, he stopped. He Yan was the most cunning and slippery person. Why did he suddenly take the wrong medicine? Earlier, when he had personally gone to intercept them, the 2,000 riders had charged straight out of the city. They had the arrogant attitude of wanting to kill anyone who blocked their way. This made Ruan Daicheng almost think that there was a mutiny and could only avoid them. At the time, he was only glad that he had caught something on them. Now that he thought about it, Ruan Daicheng calmed down and his abacus sank deeper. He picked up the memorial from the desk and slowly burned it with a match. He said to the startled scholar, "Change it to a secret letter. Find a trusted courier and send it 500 miles to the capital. Personally hand it to the minister." At this time, a dusty man with a clean face and no beard broke into the tent. Ruan Daicheng was angry at the incompetence of his guards, but when he saw the man's face, he was surprised and nervous. He was about to say something to please the man, but the eunuch stomped his feet and pointed at Ruan Daicheng's nose and scolded, "Useless thing, why didn't you stop He Yan's 2,000 cavalrymen?" Ruan Daicheng was stunned. He was thinking about how to remedy the situation. The eunuch who served the empress for many years in the palace waved his sleeves and left. He left a sentence that made Ruan Daicheng's legs go weak. "Ruan Daicheng, you'll be kicked out of the sword pavilion. Useless." The baffled Ruan Daicheng stood rooted to the ground. After a long time, he came back to his senses. There was no third person in the tent. This general with real power only dared to curse in his heart. "Son of a bitch, do you have balls?" Outside the sword gate, 2,000 cavalrymen galloped like a flood. In the distance, there was a man with a head full of silver hair. He was wearing a bright red coat because of the gallop. He was extremely arrogant. He had stopped Chao Changqing 3 times in the Liang Palace. Once, the eunuch was only 100 steps away from His Majesty, but he was still stopped by the head of the eunuchs in the world. Previously, when Baihu'er came out of the Bailiang Palace to get married, it even alarmed the king of Bailiang. Su Shao asked with a smile, "She's married already?" Baihu'er said calmly, "Take a breather. I'll be back soon." Su Shao put his hands in his sleeves naturally and asked, "It doesn't count, right?" Baihu'er nodded, "Of course." On this day, Nangong Push, who was known as the most beautiful woman in the world, left Liangzhou and disappeared. Almost at the same time, in the vast western region, a horse was riding slowly. The man in white held a dark purple spear in his hand. The spearhead was not inlaid, making the spear look more like a stick. The name of the spear was Plum Wine. Chapter 667. He rode in the front. The hot wind in the desert blew against his face. The rope on his cloak gradually loosened and then fell into the yellow sand. It revealed a shocking, bright-colored python robe. The eunuch was followed by 2,000 cavalrymen of the sword Garrett a full mile behind him. There was an iron law in the Liang dynasty that was clearly engraved on the dragon's steel. No eunuch was allowed to leave the palace. After the Liang dynasty became peaceful, there were only a few exceptions in the past decade or so. The first time was when Princess Sui Zhu sneaked into Beimei. After the head eunuch of the Imperial Horse Directorate returned to the palace, he died not long after being entangled by his red threads. Another time was when he went to pick up the emperor's illegitimate son Zhao Kai. Even though it was the emperor's order, he still used half of his friendship. Mobilizing the 2,000 cavalrymen behind him that were only loyal to the royal family was still a quiet move by the emperor on the chessboard of the world. He also used half of the remaining friendship between master and servant. But Han Shengxian, the most powerful official whose real name was very unfamiliar in the court, didn't regret it, let alone think about the emperor's fickleness. The human cat Han Shengxian was greedy for power. Otherwise, he would not have held power alone for so many years. However, he knew who he was greedy for. Back then, when the emperor was still the weakest prince, he was willing to die for the emperor. When the emperor sat on the dragon throne and had children, Han Shengxian chose to call him Great Master Zhao Kai from the very beginning. Han Shengxian was the son of that gentlewoman. Han Shengxian had eaten a few meals personally cooked by her. He was not the least bit despised by her as a eunuch. The world bullied me. Han Shengxian, once, I will bully you all my life. If she respected me, I'll respect her 1,000 feet. She died early, so Han Shengxian repaid her kindness to Zhao Kai. Han Shengxian was never educated and didn't know many words. He also never cared about national laws or human relationships. The emperor and the prince Zhao Kai were the only rules. Han Diaosi only cared about these two family rules in his life. Spurring his horse forward, Han Diaosi saw the dense cavalry formation in front of him. The old eunuch, who did not carry any weapons, raised his hands and twirled 2 strands of silver hair hanging down from his temples. His hands were bound by 3,000 red threads. Once he killed all the rebels and traitors that the Bailiang had cultivated, he would be able to hand the job over to Hien. Han Diaosi could have easily killed the head eunuch of the Hall Directorate, who went to the sword Garrett to stop him from mobilizing his troops. However, the Catman did not have any ill feelings towards the Empress, and he did not want to embarrass his young master in the future. Therefore, he had a falling out with her too early. Thus, he allowed Ruan Daicheng to go to the Sword Firmament Pavilion and look for the good-for-nothing Ruan Daicheng. He charged towards the 3,000-strong cavalry without slowing down, still in the mood to smile and say, "Black monk, don't let our disciples die here. Otherwise, as the great teacher, this old servant will tear you apart, even if it means risking my life." Wang Ji, the cavalry general on the opposite side, did not relax even when facing Han Diaosi, not only because he had guessed the identity of the old eunuch, but also because he knew what he was doing. Treason. Wang Ji lowered his head and touched the saber that he had kept for many years. The 3,000 cavalrymen behind him did not recognize Ruan Daicheng, the commander of the Sword Garrett. They had been fighting for many years and had even forgotten about the son of the Zhao family. His father was placed in the Sword Garrett by Great General Su as a garrison general. Before his death, he had gathered 1,000 trusted subordinates, and in 10 years, he had gained 2,000 cavalrymen. Among them, 300 were from Bailiang who had slowly infiltrated the Sword Garrett. Most of them were 15 or 16 years old youths. Last year, 80 of them came in one go. In the quicksand of the western regions, 800 miles away from the Sword Gate Pass, Wang Ji saw the human butcher for the first time. Wang Ji knew that it would not be long before he could use his father's treasured saber, the Bailiang saber. Wang Ji tilted his head and spat on the ground, silently pulling out the Bailiang saber. 1,000 cavalrymen retreated abnormally, while 2,000 began to charge. This was an interception that risked countless lives to stop a finger-profound level expert. Wang Ji still wanted to become a famous governor of the border, a great general who could intimidate the Great Desert. If he really died here, he would definitely regret it. But since he was reincarnated and had the same surname as his father who used to be a Bailiang soldier, he had no regrets. The plum wine was in his hand. The man who did not drink took the water pouch from his waist and drank a mouthful. Some people said that he was the best general who could turn something rotten into something magical since the emergence of large-scale cavalry battles. He was invincible in cavalry battles with more than 100,000 soldiers. Even the current emperor praised him as the white-clothed warrior immortal who could not be compared to all the other officials in the court. In the army of the Liang dynasty, who was the best in martial arts? Originally, most people said that General Gu Jiantang was better. Since he fought 2 battles with Beimang Hong Jingyan and the Ancestor Bronze Man, he had become the new immortal of spears, vaguely surpassing Gu Jiantang, who had extraordinary saber skills. Chen Jibao stopped his horse and turned around. A small group of cavalrymen followed behind. The horses under them were exhausted after a long chase. They saw the leading woman with a sword on her back, covered in dried blood. Chen Jibao's bitter smile flashed across his face. Chapter 668. He turned his horse around and lightly tossed the water skin to her. Unfortunately, she didn't catch it. The two of them were 50 paces apart. Chen Jibao laughed. You guys don't even consider physical strength. Even 2,000 riders may not be able to stop me. The woman who hadn't slept for 2 days said coldly, the 600 iron Buddhas that Dian Xiongzong deployed and the 800 crossbowmen sent by Wei Fuqing are all dead. They're really promising. They're all wearing Beimang armor. Chen Jibao said lightly. What's the point of killing them? They didn't rebel. They just happened to appear in the western regions. Su Weisheng calmed his breathing. Chen Jibao wasn't in a hurry to make a move. He still reined at his horse and stopped. The end of his spear pointed at the yellow sand under the horse's hooves. I didn't expect you to come. Otherwise, I wouldn't have done this. Su Weisheng said sarcastically. There's a battle that Chen Jibao didn't expect? Chen Jibao said indifferently. I did, but I didn't want to admit it. I don't know why, but every time I think of a situation that I don't want to happen, it always happens. There's no exception this time. Su Weisheng asked directly. Are you really going to rebel against Bailiang? Chen Jibao tilted his head slightly and asked back. Who said so? Su Weisheng didn't want to talk anymore. He gently breathed in and out, the ancient sword on his back trembling. Chen Jibao still didn't show any signs of lifting his spear. When I was young, I didn't want my father to die for my adoptive father. In the end, he took 62 Chen family members to bring up the rear without saying anything. He still went. The second time, I didn't want His Royal Highness to refuse to enter the capital to be the prince consort. He didn't go. Last time, I didn't want him to return from Beimang to Bailiang alive. He survived. This time, I didn't want to see you, but you came. Chen Jibao finally mentioned the plum wine. All these years, I didn't do anything. I just wanted my foster father to slowly grow old and die in the position of king of Bailiang. Now, I still don't want to be a disloyal and unjust traitor. So, even though I knew that His Royal Highness had gone out 3 times, I still stood by and watched. The last time I didn't want to do anything. It just had to appear again. Chen Jibao bent down and took out a spearhead from his hanging pouch. He inserted it into the already incomplete plum wine. When he lowered his head, the man in white said slowly, I know that the maid in Wutongin, Blue Bird, is the daughter of spear immortal Wang Xiao. I knew that the instant spear was left in the armory. She was groomed to be a death warrior, to be used to kill me in the future. I was very clear about that. Su Weisheng, since you are the death warrior who has been hiding for more than 20 years, I, Chen Jibao, will let you die today. After all, the last man you saw before you died was me. I will take your corpse to Western Shu and be the princess of Shu for 10 years. This group of horses held the silver bottle that was about to overturn the current power structure in the Western region. They actually stopped their horses heading west. The place where they stopped was between the Sword Garret and the quicksand. Behind the group of horses was the Iron Gate Pass recorded in the Spring and Autumn Chronicle. The pass was built by the Emperor Qin. The cliff was like an axe, and the stone was like iron. This was a steep canyon that was 20 miles long upstream of the Jiao River. It was an important passage from the western region to the eastern region. Every time the situation in the Central Plains was stabilized, they had to pass through the north and south of Tianshan. The armored soldiers of the Central Plains had to pass through this place. Every time the horse galloped to the west, it symbolized the power of the Central Plains. Every time they retreated to the east, it meant the collapse of the Central Plains. Prince Zhao Kai got into the carriage and sat on the coachman's seat. The talisman general in golden armor stood guard beside him. When he saw a dusty old monk in black coming from the north, he smiled brightly. It was his second master, the sickly tiger Yang Tai Sui. When the old monk saw that Zhao Kai was safe and sound, he felt relieved. He did not say a word to his disciple, who had the potential to become a Buddha and stop the process of destroying Buddhism. He only put his palms together and bowed to the Bodhisattva. Then he silently turned around and headed east. Less than half a mile away, with a saber and a sword, Su Fengyan urged his horse straight to the Iron Gate Pass. Any prince could rush to the western region to accumulate merits and pave the way for his future ascension to the throne. They could also allow a prince to be the king of Shu who broke the ambush line of Bailiang and Nanzhao. However, a prince could not be the king of Shu after achieving great merits, and then sit on the throne by destroying Bailiang. Moreover, this prince was Zhao Kai, the one Li Yishan wanted to kill. In front of him, an old monk rushed toward him. Using the great Buddhist supernatural power, he kept whispering to the hereditary king of Bailiang, Su Fengyan. Anyone can die. I 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 can die. My 216 retainers can die. Only Zhao Kai can't die. I can escort Zhao Kai back to the capital and go to the Bailiang Palace to ask for forgiveness. If you insist on killing Zhao Kai, who has the emperor's order and is blessed by fate, do you know what will happen to you? The old monk floated over. F***CK off. Su Fengyan, who had always been able to remain calm in front of his enemies, suddenly had bloodshot eyes. He angrily said, Yang Tai Sui, the first person I'll kill today is you. Do you still remember the white clothes case in the capital? I would rather die in the process of practicing my saber than be a useless king of Bailiang in the future. I want to kill you bastards with my own hands,